So I'm Patty Lemer, in case you hadn't guessed, and I live in Pittsburgh. I feel like I should be bouncing a ball. Hey, my name is Patty, and I'm from Pittsburgh. Remember that game? So, how many of you knew somebody with autism when you were growing up? Keep your hand up. Okay? How many of you have somebody with autism in your neighborhood? How many of you have somebody, keep your hand up, how many of you have somebody with autism in your family? Okay. So what, you can cut down. So what am I trying to show? Is autism increasing? Is there anybody who thinks it's not increasing? You know, there are some skeptics out there who say, oh, we're just better at recognizing it, and the definition has changed, and we don't believe that, do we? Because if that were so, there would be a lot of 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds with autism, and there aren't. Temple Grandin, she's a unique individual, and she doesn't have a lot of company out there. So, we agree that autism is on the rise. Why? Not because we're better at diagnosing it. Give me some guesses. Throw it out. We're a small group. Yeah?
Our world is so toxic that it's having an effect on our neurogenic processing
It
systems.
is. We now live in a super toxic world. I grew up in Pittsburgh. When I was young, we used to write our names on the walls. The walls were so dirty that we could write on them. And every summer, the wall washers came and cleaned off the walls, and my mother took down the blackened curtains and washed them and put them up, and they were sort of kind of white. And every summer again, they turned black from the steel mills where I grew up. So we have no steel mills anymore. So wasn't that worse than it is now?
I think that generation's immune systems were compromised early development.
Which
Now,
generation?
Your generation or other generations prior to this, where their immune systems probably weren't as great as they could be.
We're not as
Yeah.
greatly compromised.
Right, we're not as
exactly.
compromised then, but then they have kids, so the immune systems are different.
What's your name?
Michelle.
Michelle's right. So we grew up in a very dirty, I grew up in a very dirty, yucky, toxic environment. But our bodies were healthier. So we didn't get so sick. So today we have a double whammy. We have a whammy of compromised immune systems and a toxic world, which is a petri dish for trouble. So how did our immune systems get so screwed up? Why is this generation more compromised? And there's a book actually called A Compromised Generation, written by a good friend of mine named Beth Lambert, who founded an organization called Epidemic Answers, which both Louise and I work with. And I'm now the chairman of the board of Epidemic Answers, and Louise is on the advisory board. And Beth wrote this book when she saw her kids, who were all under 10, with immune system problems. What's an immune system problem? How do we know we have a compromised immune system? Shout it out. What's an immune system marker?
Asthma.
Allergies?
Asthma.
What?
Asthma.
Asthma? Eczema? Strep, colds, constant being sick? You have tummy problems? What?
Thyroid.
Thyroid problems. We have problems with each one of our systems. We have digestive problems, we have skin problems, we have breathing problems. All of those problems say something's wrong with our immune system. What screwed it up? No guesses?
Processed food,
Processed food, what else?
antibiotics.
Antibiotics. How do antibiotics compromise your immune system? Antibiotics. What?
Once you take the antibiotic, it doesn't work.
Why?
Because I don't know, my husband's a doctor, he explained it to me, he doesn't like it. Builds up a resistance.
It
You
kills
build up
everything.
resistance to it, so you can't use it
So
again.
what happens, we are, the immune system is, yeah. The immune system is really smart. And when a bug comes along, thank you, that's good. The immune system used to know how to deal with those bugs. But the medical model said, we have this miracle drug and people are dying because they don't have good immune systems, and these miracle drugs can save their lives. So we invented penicillin, we invented amoxicillin, and these drugs actually saved lives. But we had a little too much of a good thing.
So like us.
So like us. Well, if we can use an antibiotic to save a life of somebody who's sick, why don't we use it for every cold that comes along? And then what happened? Those bugs got pretty smart. And the bugs got smarter than our immune system. And the first time we took those antibiotics, our immune system said, who's that? Who sent for that drug? That drug is doing my job. The second time the antibiotic came along, the immune system said, ho-hum, there it is again. I don't have to do anything. The third and fourth time the antibiotic came along, the immune system said, okay, I give up. You do the job. So now we have a whole group of people who have compromised immune systems who are living in our toxic world. What does this have to do with autism? So, what does the immune system have to do with autism? If you ask your classic psychologists, we don't have any of those in here, they will say nothing. Autism is a neurological problem that starts in utero and we can't do anything about it. But we know that's not true, which is why I wrote this book. Because when we see people with autism that is diagnosed at 2 or 3 or even a little bit earlier than 2, if we look at what happened before they got that autism diagnosis, all of those people had these symptoms of screwed up immune systems. Is that true of your kids? Anybody in here have a kid with autism who didn't have tummy problems, didn't have skin problems?
No, none.
Did not. Okay? Did your child, was she developing normally? And then what happened?
No, I'm sorry, not divine. My son's PDD and OS, whatever that means.
All right,
I know, I'm
so
sure you
that's
love that
autism.
word.
That's on the autism
That's,
spectrum.
yeah, it's an ASD. He didn't walk till late. That was or crawl till late. Excuse me. So that was the first indication that we had. But his health has always been.
All right, so his health's been okay. So something else happened with her son. It wasn't immune-based. And so in my book, I talk about all the different things that could have happened. And I'm not going to take your personal developmental history here, but maybe you'll recognize your son when we talk about some of the other systems where something might have gone wrong. Okay? So what I call all of these things that could have gone wrong is total load. And the total load theory is the basis for why we have more autism and what is happening to this generation of kids. So if you have a bridge, and years ago, and I wrote an article that started when the bridge collapsed in Minnesota. I don't know if many of you remember that. An 18-wheeler was going across a bridge and the bridge collapsed. What happened that made that bridge collapse? Do we blame that truck driver for that bridge collapsing? No. Do we blame the engineer who designed the bridge? Maybe a little bit. Do we blame the weather? Do we blame the ship that went crashing into the mooring of the bridge? All of these things add up to make autism. So if we have immune system problems and maybe a problematic birth and maybe some structural problems and maybe some endocrine problems like thyroid problems, and then the child may get an antibiotic or he may get a vaccine and have a reaction, or something puts this child over the threshold and all of a sudden you have autism. Was this the straw that broke the camel's back, or was this the cause of autism? Nobody knows. So today's kids are being born here with not a lot of wiggle room between unhealthy and autistic. Our generation of kids, I can't go way down there, were born here. And we could get a vaccination and take a little penicillin and paint the room with toxic paint and spray for termites. And we still had some wiggle room here, didn't we? But today's kids who are born here, why are they born here? What made them have more toxins? Us? Because we're more toxic, and nature's way of keeping mommy on the planet is for her to dump her toxic load into her pregnancy. So how many pregnancies miscarry? Those pregnancies are toxic pregnancies which we mourn when we really should say thank you, because this was our way of discharging a lot of our toxins so that the next pregnancy could be healthy. Some people are so toxic, and I don't want to offend anybody, but they can't even get pregnant. So we have an epidemic of infertility now, where the body is saying, this womb, this body is too toxic to carry a baby. So we are not going to let you get pregnant until you clean out your body. And at the end of my talk, this is my goal. The end is to prevent this by getting to young parents before they conceive children who are just at the cusp. So our kids with autism, born here, just below the threshold, it doesn't take many toxins to put them over the border. Does this make sense to you? Okay. So now we have kids in a toxic world. And we have behaviors that we don't like. And we have symptoms that are problematic in our socially developed world. We have flapping, which traditionally we say, oh no, quiet hands. We have lack of eye contact and poor attention, which we don't like because we like people to look at us when we talk to them and they talk to us. And we have kids who have diarrhea and constipation and all kinds of gut problems, which we use medicines to stop and start and stop and start. But all of those are symptoms, aren't they? They are symptoms that the immune system, the gastrointestinal system, and some breathing problems, all of these are gone awry. And the body's number one priority is staying well. Its number one thing to do is to breathe, to poop, to eat, and to sleep. And most of our kids with autism have trouble with all of those things, don't they? And if you aren't eating well, sleeping well, pooping well, breathing well, your body has to put all of its energy into those things. And the idea that we want you to have quiet hands and pay attention and learn how to read and write and say hello and thank you and goodbye is off the screen. Those are not priority for sick bodies. Does this make sense? So in my approach, what we do is we look at these load factors and we say, which ones of these is taking up the most room? It's like a tree. When you cut a tree down, you see good growth months, growth years, big rings. I want to know which rings are taking up a lot of room. And again, we have to be good diagnosticians to figure this out with our kids. Is it food? Is it environmental toxins? Is it something we're breathing? Is it something that's in the house? And sometimes it's easy to identify it, but usually we have to run some laboratory tests or do some energy testing with muscle testing. And there's lots of ways we can figure out what is taking up the most room for your kids. And that's where we start. And we start not always with therapists, but we start with our own lifestyle. We look at how we are living today that might be contributing to our kids' health problems, their behavior problems, and their learning problems. And this is when I turn into a cranky old granny. And I'm a grandma. I have an 8-year-old, a granddaughter who just turned 8, and I just spent 5 days with her. And I'm exhausted, you can imagine. But I also looked at this child's lifestyle, and she lives in New York, as you do, and I live in quiet, little, boring Pittsburgh, where we sit down and we have meals in the old-fashioned way, and we don't spend a lot of time in the car, and we don't spend a lot of time with electronics, and we spend time outside. So my granddaughter doesn't eat anything that's not white. You know that child, right? She doesn't eat too many vegetables. She likes crunchy things. You know these kids who are picky eaters. When I was a picky eater, I was forced to eat what was on my plate. But not today. Restaurants have kid menus. Who invented kid menus? When did that come in? Is there a vegetable on kid menus? Occasionally, but not very often. It's chicken fingers and pizza and French fries and macaroni and cheese. So what we found when we looked at what kids with autism eat was that they're all eating the same thing. Isn't that amazing? You think they're all talking to each other on the computer? And they've all decided that the only thing they're going to eat is bagels and cream cheese and macaroni and cheese and cereal and milk and pizza. What are all those things made of?
Carbs.
Wheat and dairy. So this was a hint to us that maybe wheat and dairy could be problems. And there was a mom back in the early 90s named Karen Cerusi. Come on and sit up here, we got comfortable chairs. There was a woman named Karen Cerusi who went into the literature and discovered that many people have difficulty digesting wheat and dairy products. And this is called the opioid excess theory. And we decided to try something with our kids with autism. We took them off of wheat and dairy products. And Louise and Paul tonight were gracious enough to offer us a gluten-free dinner to support our wish that your kids with autism have a gluten and dairy-free life. And what happened when we took kids off of gluten-containing and casein, which is the protein and dairy products, we found that 80% of them improved in their behavior. And 80% of their digestion and their breathing and other bodily processes improved. That's pretty good. We didn't do any tests on them. We just suggested to parents that they try it, and Karen Cerusi supported this. If you haven't read her book, it's old, but you can still find it online. It's called Unraveling the Mystery of Autism and PDD. So we put them both in the same category. So that's one of the things that we did, was just change their diet. And then somebody discovered Ben Feingold, who was a doctor way back in the 80s, who worked for Kaiser Permanente, and he said, maybe these additives in the food are irritating them. And he did some research and found that colors and flavors and preservatives like BHT were also really irritating to our kids' digestive systems. So they offered them a totally natural diet. And then we started looking at other factors which were part of our lifestyle, such as sleeping. How much sleep do our kids need? A lot, he's right. More than they're getting. So the average school-age kid needs 10 to 11 hours of sleep. They need to go to bed by 8 o'clock if they're going to get up at 6, if they're going to get up at 7, because these kids are not getting enough sleep. And when you sleep is when your body heals itself, when your digestive system heals, when your skin heals, when your lungs heal. And so the body needs sleep to heal. One of the things that we look at is, what is the environment in which you're sleeping? Is it safe? And what do we have today that we didn't have in the last generation is electromagnetic fields. You know what those are? This is the invisible electricity that comes from our electronics. It comes from plasma televisions. It comes from cell phones. It comes from computers. It comes from DVD players. It comes from all those electronics that we love and take for granted, which should not be in the bedroom of a child with autism, or even anybody, because they disrupt the sleep. So they're disrupting our nervous system, they're agitating our nervous system, but also many of our kids have bugs in their gut, which are a result of too many antibiotics and eating unsafe foods. And these bugs proliferate. What happens when you give an antibiotic? Anybody knows? Somebody, you said earlier, the antibiotics wipe out all the good bacteria and the bad bugs proliferate. So not only does the electromagnetic fields agitate us and our nervous systems, but they agitate the bugs. And what do these bugs do with electromagnetic fields? They put out toxins. They put out more toxins, which agitate the nervous system even more. So these bugs and the problematic gut and the problematic breathing are all a result of inflammation. So inflammation, if you read anything about illness, is a commonality. So we've got inflammation, bugs, and we've got toxins. And the toxins are heavy metals. Where are we getting heavy metals? What are some heavy metals? Mercury, aluminum, cadmium. Where are these antimony? Where are they coming from? Our soil, our food, our vaccinations. All of these contain small amounts, minuscule amounts, but they add up. And so this is the perfect storm. Inflammation, bugs, and toxins. Has to address all three. You've got to tame the inflammation, you've got to kill the bugs, and you've got to detoxify the internal environment. Very, very difficult process. And what's difficult about it is to balance. Because if you don't balance, if you detox without taming the inflammation, or you detox the toxins without killing the bugs, you make more trouble. You wreak more havoc. Is this working? Yeah. One of the other sources that I failed to mention is our teeth. We have toxins in our, and heavy metals in our mouth from mercury fillings. And when I first got into this, in the beginning of the autism epidemic was in the early 90s. And this is when we saw more and more people with autism coming out of the woodwork in 91, 92, 93, was when the vaccination schedule went up, when we started using more antibiotics. This is before there was an internet, if you can remember that ancient history. And I was in practice then with a woman named Kelly Dorfman, who some of you might know in Washington, D.C. And Kelly and I naively decided that we were going to start a nonprofit. And that's how I got hooked up with Louise of WeeZee World. Because she was one of my first members of this nonprofit called Developmental Delay Resources. And we sent out a questionnaire with 25 questions to parents. What do you think happened to your kids? Kelly and I thought that antibiotics were to blame here. We thought that kids with autism had too many antibiotics. But what we found from parents, and we didn't have an internet and a Facebook and a social media to get this information out. What we had was paper and stamps and envelopes, and we sent questionnaires to people. We Xeroxed them and we addressed them. We didn't even have computers that knew how to print labels. And we sent them out. And in 6 weeks, we got almost 1,000 questionnaires back.
Wow.
And parents surprised us They told us, what do you think they told us that they thought was causing their kids to have these developmental problems, which were being called autism? Vaccines and amalgams. Mothers who had more than 5 amalgams in their mouth and who had had dental work during their pregnancy were 10 times more likely to have kids with autism. And kids who had had a vaccination reaction were 25 times more likely to have autism. We were very surprised by this. We had kind of loaded the questionnaire toward antibiotics, but the parents said, no, 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 you're not listening. It's vaccines and dental work. Fast forward 20 years. This was 93, 94. 20 years ago. How many of you are following what's going on with this CDC whistleblower stuff? You know, everybody know what I'm talking about? The CDC is being blamed for withholding information and manipulating data about the relationship between vaccines and autism. Because somebody has come out of the CDC and said, this is what happened. And then CNN, a reporter on CNN, manipulated this and went on and said, we have proven, this was just this week, we have proven that vaccines do not cause autism. And so many parents were in an outrage over this that there are now over 200 30-second YouTube clips of parents talking about their experience. Were you on one of those clips? They're pretty powerful. Hearing a parent saying, vaccines cause autism. If vaccines caused autism, every child in America would be autistic, because almost every child in America is vaccinated. And that's why I insist on the total load theory, which is that vaccines are part of the total load in genetically vulnerable kids, which yours are. So how do you become genetically vulnerable? What is a genetically vulnerable kid? If vaccines are contributing toxins, and amalgams are contributing toxins, and our food and our air and our water are contributing toxins, what's the difference between the kid who's typical and the kid who is diagnosed with autism?
I think how quickly they can get rid of the toxins.
She's great. I didn't plant her. The ones who are typical are able to detoxify. Their bodies have the ability to do what's called methylation and sulfation, which are the 2 cycles of detoxification. Those of us who aren't so fortunate hold those toxins in our bodies. We don't methylate. We don't sulfate so well. And how we learned this was because in the last 5 years, we have the ability to test our genes. This whole gene project allows us now to go online and buy for $99 to buy a kit from a company called 23andMe and prick our finger and send it off to somebody and get our genetic profile. How many of you have done that? I strongly recommend that you do that, because you then know whether you have a genetic mutation or not.
But
Now
the government knows too.
Pardon?
And it's being all kept by the government, you know that, right?
Maybe.
Not maybe, I have a son that works in the industry.
Okay.
It's all being kept.
From 23andMe?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's also being cross-referenced to other people you're related to, just so you
Okay.
know.
So If that worries you, what's your name?
Christina.
Christina, talk to Christina because she has some knowledge about this. So if you get your genetic profile, and what we did was some doctors looked at the genetic profiles of some of these people with kids on the spectrum, and they found commonalities among them, which is in this ability to detoxify. And a couple of these genetic mutations, put these letters in your mind's eye, are 5 letters, MTHFR, which stand for methyl tetrahydrate folate reductase. Now, you don't have to be a biochemist to recognize that, but that's what it is. But if you write down MTHFR, or keep it in your mind's eye, and add a few vowels to it, you get a not very nice word, which is what parents of kids with autism call that gene. Because it is a nasty thing that's happened to your family. Now, Angelina Jolie did this genetic profiling, and she found out she had the BRCA gene. And what did she do? She lopped off her breast because she didn't want to get breast cancer. This is not the smartest thing in the world to do. And unfortunately, she didn't get herself to a biomedical person who said, Angelina, you don't have to get get breast cancer, because the genetics is only half the problem. The genetics doesn't rear its ugly head without an environmental trigger. It takes both of these to make autism. It takes both of these to make breast cancer. So we look at this genetic profiling, I look at it, and I will just talk for myself, positively, because it helps us understand what we need to do. We can give nutrients to help ourselves get rid of this inability to detoxify and to be able to detoxify. And you have to work with somebody who's very knowledgeable about this to learn what those things are. But it includes something that helps the methylation. And then there's a couple other genetic issues. So what I've done in my book is I am a counselor, and I counsel families as to how to prioritize their kids' therapies. And it's so hard for you. I don't envy you at all, because you have become a business. Autism is a booming business with lots of people out there with magic bullets to help your kids get better. And almost every one of those magic bullets has efficacy. There are probably a few scam artists out there looking at you and saying, I can get a lot of money from those people. But most of these people are good people, and they have good programs. But how do you know if this program's right for your child? And so that's what I did in my book, is I looked at a priority that is not made in stone, but it's a general template for helping you figure out what you do with your kids. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next 15 minutes, is how you figure this out. And the first place that you go is to look at your lifestyle. Because if you're going to spend a lot of money with a lot of therapists, doing a lot of therapies, and you're still eating Twinkies and drinking Coke and living in a toxic house that might have mold in it and spraying for termites and sleeping with electromagnetic fields, you are trying to fill the bathtub with the drain out. It's not going to work. You may get a little bit of benefit, but you're not going to get a lot. So we have to look at our homes and our schools and how we manage our time and our energy and what food we're eating and what we're drinking. Once we have a little bit of control over that, we start with getting the bad stuff out and putting in the good stuff. And this is food, this is energy, and we have an energy worker here who, Bernadette, who you should talk to because she sounds like she's doing amazing work. I've just met her tonight. But many of the kids that she sees have gigantic energy fields. And what that means is that they're like antenna. And they're picking up your energy and the energy from that electrical outlet 12 feet away. So we have to do two things. We have to make sure that there's not bad energy surrounding them, and we have to balance their ability to deal with this energy. Help make it that they are not oversensitive to what's out there. And there's lots of energy techniques that you will find are tools in the toolbox of different kinds of therapists. She happens to be a physical therapist, but occupational therapists, speech language therapists, psychologists, counselors, massage therapists, they've taken courses in these different energy techniques, which they're not, some of them are advertising, but the entree to them is you need an OT because your child is not holding a pencil properly, or you need a PT because he has a funny gait, or you need a speech pathologist, and you want one who's got a lot of tools in their tool chest and understands the role of energy in balancing the system and how that balancing of the energy really lays the foundation for those end product skills that we're looking for. So we want to do detox. We want to take away problematic foods, but we also want to get good stuff in. And what is good stuff? Real food. We forgot what real food is. Real food doesn't come in boxes. It's on the periphery of the grocery store. It's usually colored. It's not white. And it's food that's alive. And my favorite author on what real food is Michael Pollan, Pollan, who is Tracy Pollan's brother. Tracy Pollan, who's married to Michael J. Fox. And Michael Pollan has written a little teeny book called Food Rules. And I don't know whether he meant the rules to be a noun, like these are the rules about food, or food rules. It's a verb. I like the second part because food does rule. And if you're not eating good food, the rest is wasted. So we've got to get vegetables back into our diet. Fruits are sometimes problematic for our kids. Part of the Feingold diet eliminates a lot of fruits. What's wrong with fruits? You have a lot of sugar in them. Some of them have salicylates in them, which are agitating to some of our kids. So vegetables are rarely problematic, and especially those that are green. So Michael Pollan has rules like if it's grown on a plant, it's good. If it was made in a plant, forget it. If your grandmother didn't eat it, forget it. So I love this little book. It costs $10. You can find it in most bookstores, and I highly recommend it. So we're going to get good food into our diet. But if food alone could solve this problem, it would be easy. But for our kids who are so malnourished, food alone doesn't do the job. One thing that you have to take is good fat. Why is fat important? Because our nervous system is covered with a fatty sheath, and that's made out of food that we eat. What was the best fat that we could possibly eat comes from fish. That's omega-3 fish oil. And my granddaughter won't even be in the same room with a fish, let alone try to get her to eat a fish. And her mother, my daughter, thinks fat is a 4-letter word because she thinks if you eat fat, you get fat. So she won't let her eat any fat. And so here's this kid with an agitated nervous system because she's not eating any good fats. So I stuff good omega-3 fats into her every time I see her. And there's lots of ways of doing that. Our grandmothers used cod liver oil. They knew, but that was stinky and we had to hold our nose. And now we can get good fats in it with gummies made by Nordic Naturals, which are, or a liquid, or with Spectrum or Nordic. They all are flavored and they don't have any additives or colors in them. So the minute I mention fish oil, somebody says, oh my God, it has mercury in it. Isn't fish bad? Some fish is bad. The bigger fish are bad, like tuna fish. The smaller fish are good, like sardines. The smaller the fish, the more fat it has, and the better it is in terms of lower levels of toxins. So you have Whole Foods, so you want to get Nordic Naturals or a liquid or something, and all of your kids should be on some kind of essential fat. The second thing they should be on is vitamin D. Vitamin D in autism, this is a slam dunk. All of us are limited in our vitamin D. How do we get vitamin D? From the sun. And what have we done? Just like we've taken fat out of our diet, we've taken sun out of our diet. And we've smeared sunscreen all over our kids so that they don't get cancer. But what we're doing is we're finding very low vitamin D levels. You want to make sure you have your kids' vitamin D levels tested, and that number should be at least 40. They say that normal is 25 or above. Having a vitamin D level of 25 is like having an IQ of 90. It's okay, it's the average range, but it's not high enough. We want to be higher than the 25th percentile. So you've got to take vitamin D, and the best way to take it, the most absorbable way to take it, is in drops. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and you can get it in liposomal drops, which make it very absorbable, and you can just drop it into kids' mouth. You can put it in some food, applesauce or something, and it's very palatable. And the kids should have 1,000 to 5,000 units a day. You know what the RDA on vitamin D is? 800.
What
Again,
are you
it's
basing
like,
that on? What is the 1 to 5,000 based on?
It's based on what you need to keep your levels above 40. You may not need 1,000 to 5,000. Get your level tested first and see where it is, and then you're going to adjust it. It's really hard to overdose vitamin D, really hard. And you can if you're taking 20,000, 50,000 over a long period of time, but nobody's doing that. All right, so we're going to get the good stuff in, and that's a real quickie way. There's 100 pages on this in the book.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about what we do beyond the biology. The second thing is to look at structural issues by slapping the knee and seeing if the leg goes out. That's one reflex. Our bodies are programmed from conception with over 100 different reflexes. It's an amazing miracle that happens from conception. And the sole purpose of these reflexes is for the baby to move and grow in utero and to get out of the birth canal and to get from helpless to walking. So it's 9 months plus about a year. That's what the reflexes do. So those reflexes are smart. And if environmental circumstances are optimal, those reflexes emerge and they help the baby develop, go down into the birth canal, break the sac, and get out. But if those situations are not optimal, for instance, if the mother was carrying twins or had a problematic pregnancy and somebody said, oh, I think you need to have bed rest, and she didn't move around in space, or if they did a lot of sonograms, which has been shown to affect the baby in utero, or if the baby was pulled out with forceps or vacuum aspiration, any of those can affect reflex development. The role of reflexes, especially in motor development, like in sensory development, is just emerging and being understood. And so the programs that you have here, many of them are designed to encourage those reflexes to become active and integrated. And if you fast forward to kids who didn't crawl, or kids who crawled funny, like a bear walk, or kids who walked late, or kids who have problems holding a pencil, or kids who are bedwetters, many of these can be looked back at. That's a specific reflex that didn't develop properly. So, do you do reflex work? Some, again, this is a tool in the tool chest of PTs, OTs, speech pathologists, brain gyn people. Many of them are doing reflex work, and there's a lot of people involved in reflexes now. There's one woman named Svetlana Moskotova who has become very well known doing the MNRI, which is Moskotova Neuroreflex Integration, and we can help you find somebody who does that. But first of all, you need somebody to look at your child's reflexes, because this is a missing link in many, many, many of our kids. It affects speech, it affects vision, it affects everything. And the energy and the reflexes have this symbiotic relationship that you've got to work on one and you work on the other together. Okay, so the third and one that I'm going to talk about tonight is the sensory. So many of our kids have sensory processing disorders. Now, I talked for almost an hour about all these other things. So by the time you get to sensory processing disorder, if you're eating garbage and you have reflex problems and you're in a toxic world, those sensory problems may just be symptoms of those other foundational things. And this is what I love about WeeZee, because she understands the relationship among all these things. That's why there's only good food here. That's why this is a non-toxic environment. This is why we have to pay attention to the foundations. At the same time, we're looking at sensory issues. And anybody who is treating sensory without treating food and environmental stuff, at this point, from what we know, I think it's almost unethical to be able to be doing that. The biggest sense that many people miss when they do sensory evaluations is vision. And my whole first book, called Envisioning a Bright Future, was about the role of vision in autism. And I give an all-day talk on this. This is a huge, huge missing link. And someone came tonight with a child, and I could see that that child had a turned eye. That turned eye is called a strabismus, and it's very disorganizing for the brain. It's impossible to have depth perception if your two eyes don't work together. It's impossible to know where you are in space, and the whole world is confusing to you if you have two eyes that don't work together. When I talk about vision, I'm talking about how the eyes and the brain and the body all work together. It's very complicated, and you need a good developmental optometrist to help you understand this and to evaluate your child. You have a lot of good people in this area, and we can help you find one.
I was just going to mention Stephanie Woolman is
Stephanie
helpful,
Woolman is
So we'd see her tonight.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, she's a wonderful
Yeah.
optometrist. Where is she?
she's in Harrison. Yeah,
Okay,
Merrimack,
so
Harrison
she's
area.
local. You've got a lot of good people
Yeah.
here. You're not at a loss of who to go to. But every child with autism is entitled to a good vision exam. And optometrists have a lot of tools in their tool chest. They have motor development. Many of them do reflex work. Many of them use lenses and prisms not to correct eyesight, but rather to change the world of a child with autism. How many of you have ever gotten glasses, a new prescription, where you go, oh my God, I got the wrong prescription, and the world is kind of tilty? And what happens is your brain integrates that, doesn't it? And at first it might have looked like the world was downhill, and then your brain put it all together. And that's what we do with kids on the spectrum. We put them in glasses that wake up their brain, and their posture changes, their breathing changes, and we break up their maladaptive behavior, and we get better behavior. We don't use those lenses to keep forever. We use them therapeutically, and then once the brain has that information, it wants it more and more, and we develop it through movement. So the fourth step is where a lot of people start: language, learning, and social emotional. I've now talked for an hour, and I'm just getting to that. And you know all about that. And there's a lot of programs out there that want you to work on language, to work on learning, and especially to work on social skills, because these are the things that we value the most. We want our kids to have friends. We want them to talk. We want them to be polite. We want them to learn to read and write and do math. But all those other things that I talked about are the foundations for that, and we have to be patient. Finally, the last step is prevention, and that's where we've come full circle. So I want young families a year before they get pregnant. And my nephew, who's 20-something, said to me, Aunt Patty, that's like sending me to dog training school before I even have a dog. Well, maybe it is, but I want to convince young couples that they can have healthy babies. And I have an initiative called Having Healthy Babies. I want to detox the parents, get their toxins out. And how do we get them out? What are our detox pathways? Poop, urine, hair, and skin. That's the way we get our toxins out. I want to detox them so that their mothers are not detoxing into the baby, into the pregnancy. So there's a whole chapter at the end of the book on how we do that. What are some of the guidelines for a pregnant mom? Maybe she doesn't need a sonogram every couple of weeks. It's fun to see that, to see your baby growing and then find out the sex and you give it a name and then it's a real person and, you know, this is the new trend. But it was also fun not knowing what you were having and having it be a surprise. And who knows what sonograms are doing to babies? Who knows what all this medicalization is doing to unborn babies? So I'll leave you with, this is an exciting time. I am very optimistic. We can help your kids heal. I don't know how much benefit we can get, but I know I can get 20-25% better function by doing some of the things in my book. So I'm happy to talk to you about your individual issues. We have plenty of books here, and I thank you for your attention for all this time. You want to take questions or?
Yeah, I think it